Hi, everyone. Hope you all are doing well and enjoying the fall season. Welcome to our lecture on 12 steps of AA. I'm going to go into a bit more detail regarding each step. The PowerPoint is very straightforward and brief. It gives a lot of dates and kind of some background on where the 12 steps started and how much it's really grown. So I'm going to, as I speak to each step, it is going to be based on alcohol, but there's so much overlap and a lot of it's exactly the same, if not identical. With the different types of addictions like narcotics or overeaters, they really use the same 12 steps, just with some kind of modifications. So the 12-step groups can also be referred to as self-help groups. There is not necessarily, actually usually never, a licensed professional running the groups. It's really based on sponsors and past alcoholics or past drug addicts who are in recovery themselves that run the groups. They don't always have 12 steps. So like I said, there are variations of this type of group. And it could be in person, which is the most common, or now with the internet, there's a lot more room to engage virtually. So the benefits is that it provides a lot of education on addiction, and one is able to obtain and also provide support. So not only someone who is struggling with addiction is benefiting from support from others, they also have the opportunity to become a sponsor and support others, which is empowering in itself, and often it serves as another piece of motivation for the individual to stay sober or clean because they have taken other people under their wings, or they have developed a really strong relationship or care for others, so they want to serve as a good role model. So of course, recovery should be done for oneself, but this kind of adds an extra factor of motivation. So affiliation with 12-step groups is consistently linked with achievement of abstinence. So there's research shows that this has been a successful form of support and form of treatment. So therefore, us as therapists should absolutely be familiar with them. Even if you don't want to specialize in addiction, it's important to be aware of the benefits of 12 steps. So the 12 steps of AA has changed so much for alcoholics all over the world. It's really allowed them to fully embrace the concept of recovering from alcoholism or addiction. What's more is that it gives them a supportive group of peers that are all working for the same goal. So there's this sense of community around the want for recovery. So AA has been the most widely used. So alcohol, it started in 1935. 1 in 10 adults in the U.S. has attended an AA meeting, which is more than 2 million memberships worldwide. So the Alcoholics Anonymous first published in 1939. You might have heard of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is really central in the 12 steps. Generations of problem drinkers have been aided by Alcoholics Anonymous, the fellowship group comprised of alcoholics helping others who are in addiction. So like I said, the commonality is that the group wants to maintain sobriety. So like I said, I'm going to go through each step, but I'm just going to skim through these next few slides. Really what they are is just kind of how AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, has really expanded, and many other self-help groups have formed, including Al-Anon, which is a borrowed and modified AA's 12 steps and 12 traditions. So it's really applicable to needs of families. So not necessarily someone who's struggling with addiction, but maybe their spouse is or a family member is. It's support for them. There's Codependence Anonymous. So you'll know that codependency is really big in addiction. So this was founded in 1986 and promotes healthy relationships. Autonomous groups in the US and 40 other countries. So there's also Narcotics Anonymous, which was created in 1953, and it's based on the same principles as AA. And it's really all-inclusive, so anyone who engages in any mood-changing or mind-altering substance is appropriate to attend Narcotics Anonymous. There's All a Teen, which was created in 1957, and this is specifically Al-Anon for teenagers. So a teenager whose mom or dad is struggling with addiction. And the main goals are really just to kind of foster that sense of community, share experiences, learn how to cope effectively with the family member who's addicted, learning to really accept that they don't have control over the use, and just to encourage others who are also in a similar situation. There's Rational Recovery, developed in 1986. This is an alternative to AA and other 12-step programs. So it's a really CBT basis, so cognitive behavioral. It does not, now this is a really kind of key factor here, that 12 steps usually classifies addiction as a disease. Well, this does not regard alcoholism as a disease. This model is a little different. And it's really focuses on the negative, self-defeating, maladaptive, dysfunctional thought patterns that one engages as, in turn, leads to using a substance, and discourages the ever-recovering drunk persona. There are no RR groups, so RR is Rational Recovery. The emphasis is really on self-efficacy, and there are no religious overtones. So there's no steps, there's no religious affiliation here. So this model is very different than a kind of classic AA meeting. There's Secular Organizations of Sobriety, also known as SOS, founded in 1986. The personal responsibility and critical thinking is the prime focus. There's Women for Sobriety, specifically for females, 1975. There are 13 statements here, not 12. And there's also AA for atheists and agnostics, which really just downplays the emphasis on religion. So those who do not believe in God or are unsure and, kind of think that we don't really know if there's a higher power, this might be more appropriate for them. So while, CBU promotes Christianity, I certainly promote Christianity. Not everyone fits in that box, so this is a really good alternative for them. Again, Rational Recovery, some more information on it. The founders right there, Jack Trimpey, who was a social worker. Again, it's CB based, and then some more information on SOS. It emerged as a reaction to the heavy emphasis on spiritual in AA and NA, and stresses personal responsibility. Women for Sobriety, this is based on the theory that AA programs fail women. So there's been some controversy in that it has favored men. AA has favored men, so this is specifically for women. And AA for atheists and agnostics, like I said, doesn't have a focus on religion and the power, therefore members have their own power. Then there's Moderation Management, MM, which is a newer kind of a newer approach, 1994. The goal is chosen by the individual, controlled drinking programs. So this one's interesting in that the goal is not abstinence. So I'm going to repeat that. In the goal is not abstinence. They go off the theory that by the time people reach serious stages of alcohol dependency, changing drinking becomes more difficult and treatment is usually costly. So believes that this situation needs to be remedied in the interest of public health and human kindness with early intervention and harm reduction programs. Moderation programs are less costly, shorter in duration, less intensive, and have higher success rates than traditional abstinence-only approaches. So it's really like, okay, we're not going to, the goal is not going to even be abstinence. The goal is just going to be to reduce your drinking and drink more in moderation. 9 out of 10 problem drinkers today actively and purposefully avoid traditional treatment approaches. And this is because the most traditional programs will label them as quote unquote alcoholics and force them to, they believe that they'll be forced to attend a 12-step and abstinence-based meeting and prescribe lifetime abstinence as the only acceptable change in drinking. So my opinion on this is that, and we could all have different opinions, is this is a good place to start. Kind of like when we talked about MI, motivational interviewing, it might be a good place to start. So, okay, if we're not ready to give up the drinking in full, why don't we at least moderate it? Why don't we at least reduce it? And interestingly, about 30% of members go on to abstinent-based programs. So this could lead to a lifestyle of sobriety. Traditional approaches that are based on the disease model of alcohol dependence and its reliance on the concept of powerlessness can be particularly counterproductive for women and minorities who often feel like victims and feel powerless. Outcome studies indicate that professional programs which offer both moderation and abstinence have higher success rates than those that offer only abstinence. Clients tend to self-select the behavior change options which will work best for them. So this model looks very different than the average 12-step program. It's a behavioral change program and national support group network for people concerned about their drinking and who have a desire to make positive lifestyle changes. This approach empowers the individual to accept personal responsibility for choosing and maintaining their own path, whether it's moderation, reducing their consumption, or abstinence in full. promotes early self-recognition of risky drinking behavior when moderate drinking is a more easily achievable goal. And it's run by lay members who came to the organization to resolve personal issues and stayed to help others. So kind of that's very similar to 12 steps, is that the leaders are usually those who did themselves or recovery. So this one is worth, I think, doing more research on, and you could kind of formulate your own hypothesis on whether this would be helpful, but I certainly think it's always a good place to start. You know, reducing alcohol is certainly better than, you know, maintaining an unhealthy amount of consumption. So at least it's something here. And then there's the National Association for Children of Alcoholics. So like Al-Anon for children, this was founded by professionals, which makes sense because obviously children aren't going to be running their own groups. They could support one another. And this is very confidential, and it's, you know, anything with minors, children have a lot of you have to consider a lot of legal components here. So this is a great resource for kiddos. So getting more into AA, and I'm going to get to each step in a minute. There's open and closed meetings, open meaning that anyone can join. So whether you're an alcoholic or not, you could join. So you guys, for your assignment, you will have to choose an open meeting because closed meetings are specific towards those who are in recovery or are officially group members. There are meetings with speakers, there are certain step meetings, and there are big book meetings, all look a little bit different. The 8 successful group characteristics of AA the 12 steps. One is members have shared experiences. So again, there's that commonality piece. I'm not alone. I don't feel judged here because other people are going through the same thing. Other people could really understand because they've been in my shoes. Education is the primary goal of AA. So a lot of times when you educate someone, it kind of, usually we don't really understand what is going, the average addict isn't, unless have been in treatment, doesn't really understand what's going on with the brain. So when you're, have gotten some psychoeducation on this piece, it kind of, I'm not saying that it'll, reduce their conceptions, but it kind of answers questions that makes them feel, things make more sense, and maybe they have some clarity. Self-help groups are self-governing, but it doesn't promote, just because it's a disease model, it really promotes accepting the responsibility. So it's not placing the responsibility on anyone else. It's really, I'm responsible for this. Single purpose for the group. There's a voluntary membership. There's no pressure to go, but you'll see, just based on the research and how long it's been around, something's working here. People continue to go back. Commitment to personal change, and there's anonymity and confidentiality. If people are really concerned with this piece, then they usually attend closed groups only. Sponsors are huge in 12 steps. So there's 2 levels here. The sponsor helps the sponsee to become or stay sober. So, if I'm having a really rough time, I'm being triggered right now, one of the things I could do is call my sponsor, and that could be very helpful. So it's kind of like an extra support at all times. Counsels the sponsee throughout the 12 steps, guide and facilitator through recovery process, and provides consistent guidance and support throughout the process. The supports sponsors' own sobriety as well. So does it really work? Yes, for some people, again, one size does not fit all, but there's really been positive outcomes here and high rates of success. So again, the advantages are predictability. You go in knowing what to expect. It's consistent. It's kind of a universal approach. You build social skills without the chemicals. So it's all natural. You're not putting anything in your body. You're learning coping skills. It's accessible, so it's free. There's locations everywhere. I'm sure you guys really found this out when you were searching a group to attend. There's so many options, and there's so many different times. So people who work, it's just very accommodating. The disadvantages is that there has not been a lot of empirical support. So there's not a lot of research. People may become overly dependent. So, it is important for those to, while, there's no limit of how many meetings you attend, it's also very important to learn how to do life without meetings, because meetings aren't always going to be there. There's and this is with all groups, you guys, it's not just AA. There's sometimes members that are encouraging kind of negative behaviors. So they're, people who aren't serious about recovery and maybe are encouraging another member to use, or if someone's in a dark place, they might relapse and encourage another individual to use. And this is the same too, like with eating disorders. I had a client who was attending an eating disorder group, and she said that one of the group members approached her afterwards and said that she knows this really good buffet that she binges out all the time and was inviting her to do that with her. So there's always that possibility, and that's no matter what type of group you are running, that's important to consider and be cognizant of. There's the risk of boundary violations. There's not really a structure always because they're run by group members themselves. There might be a lack of structure and a lack of appropriate modeling. Again, these people are in recovery themselves. And so no one is perfect, whether they're in recovery or have never had an addiction, no one's perfect. And there's a Christian foundation, so I think that's wonderful. But some people might not think that's wonderful. It doesn't really consider other cultural factors. So that's why it's good that there have been other groups developed to kind of meet others where they're at. So 12 steps is good as an adjunct. So it's important for these individuals to not only, again, if it's better than nothing, but if they could also be in some type of individual counseling with professional therapists who have been trained, that is prime. Helps clients develop self-regulation. It reduces isolation. So addiction can be very isolating and lonely. So with meetings, they're always around people. Usually it's positive people. And it gives them a space to process and reflect, as well as generalize new skills and values. So the role of the counselor encourages outside support of groups and key to treatment outcomes, educate clients about self-help groups, addressing misconceptions and concerns, so really kind of disputing false beliefs or myths, making appropriate referrals, and understanding potential barriers. So sometimes not everyone's a good fit for group. Sometimes they're not ready for group. So it's important for us as counselors to stay current on 12-step programs, really understanding that's, ethically, we need to always be staying on top of the current research. It's good to keep a list of meetings in the area handy, and that's, we have that at, our fingertips with the internet now. Information to have and to consider always having is type of addiction, transportation, whether the client really has a strong need for anonymity. Some people don't really care about this piece. Other people, it's really, really important to them. Their background, their gender, their culture, their religion, and also their personal characteristics. Again, I'll repeat it, one size does not fit all. So 12-step programs aren't going to be a good fit for everyone. And we could learn more by consulting with our colleagues, also staying current to the research, doing internet searches and getting involved, requesting literature, attending various groups ourselves. So not only, I know you did that for this class, which I hope was a very powerful experience for you, but I would recommend you do that every 6 months or every, quarterly, because it's good. You'll always gain a new experience, and it'll kind of help you develop a clearer perception on what these meetings look like. And again, they're all run a little bit differently. So here are some useful websites. If you're interested, I encourage you to at least save these websites to your desktop so you have them in the future. Now I'm going to spend some time on each step. I'll just kind of go through them briefly. The first step is, it states, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. So recovery states that when a person admits they have a problem, that's when their journey of recovery starts. 2 important words in the first step is powerless. So they are not in control, the addiction is. And the second being unmanageable. There's a negative impact in the form of health problems, relationship issues, legal difficulties, feelings of shame, guilt, and remorse. So really in the first step, the addicted person has to accept the fact that their addiction is beyond their control. With that admission comes the realization that their way of doing things simply isn't working. And once the suffering addict realizes that they can become more receptive to the idea that they will need help to recover. The second step is come to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. First and foremost, the second step is about hope. Rather than being reassigned to hellish downward spiral of addiction, a power comes to understand that recovery is certainly possible. So in other words, although the struggling addict has no control over their compulsion, that doesn't mean that there's not a solution. So this piece, step 2, really instills hope. The second consideration of this step is that it's possible to gain strength, inspiration, and guidance from something outside of and greater than oneself if stubborn ego can be laid aside. So really someone has to kind of set their pride aside and accept help. And again, I may have said this in previous lectures, but for men especially, there's this sense of it's weak to ask for help. However, I always tell my clients that it's really the opposite of that. You have to be really courageous to ask for help. So I think it's the opposite. If you feel like asking for help is weak and kind of taking away from your manhood, I would invite you to revisit that and look at how difficult it is to ask for help and really see how strong that is. So in other words, when you can temporarily make yourself subordinate to someone or something that is helping you, it is possible to be guided in the right direction. The third step, make a decision to turn our will and our lives over to care of God as we understand Him. So the first 2 steps were about reflection, but the third step of the 12 steps of AA is about action. At its simplest, the step means deciding to get out of your own way. For some non-religious people, the third step can be problematic, which is why God as we understood Him is important. Your higher power does not have to be, God. It could be whatever you believe in. It could also be the recovery process in itself. So someone's atheist or agnostic. It could be their medical and mental health professionals. It could be the innate strength of human nature, their support system, or even the fellowship that they receive from addicts or alcoholics. So you can make kind of modifications here. Because the exact nature of someone's higher power, it's personal, right? We all don't believe in the same thing. So it only has to be something outside of and a greater than yourself in which you can place your faith in. There are 4 parts to turning your will over. The first is asking for help. The second is learning to pray. The third is learning to meditate, which really means mindfulness and taking time every day to reflect on the things that happen to them, what they learn from it, and what they might do differently the next time that happens. And practicing acceptance, which means finding a way to meet life on life's terms rather than trying to control things that are beyond us. When people concentrate on those things that they can control, they're better able to focus on doing what needs to be done to recover. The 4th step states, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. In this step, one can contribute to eliminate opportunities for denial by taking an honest and sometimes uncomfortable look at yourself, your behavior when drinking and using, and the effect it has on themselves and others. Before anyone can change or even attempt to change their behaviors and attitudes, we have to know what needs changing. This inventory is not just about finding our weaknesses, those things that need changing. It is also about recovering and uncovering our strengths, which are the positive traits that we could expand on and use for our recovery. So the personal inventory must be fearless. As they face the truth about themselves, they might not like it. It might be uncomfortable. But only by acknowledging your faults can you take the next steps to correct them. So that piece may feel icky and uncomfortable, but it's necessary to grow. The second is searching, really taking time to examine one's thoughts, words, and deeds. It's a good idea to write these things down. And the third is moral, as you weigh those thoughts, words, and deeds against an objective standard of what is right against your own selfish desires. The fifth step is admitted to God, to ourselves, and to other human beings the exact nature of our wrongs. This step is absolutely necessary after a moral inventory. A person who has taken an unflinching look at the harm that they've done due to their addiction can sometimes be tormented by that knowledge. Without productive relief, that torment can lead to old, destructive ways of coping, such as drinking or using. So, because I took a moment and reflected on these things, I didn't like what I saw, therefore I'm in a state of distress, guilt, shame. So it's really easy to go back to my previous coping strategy. So talking to someone else can help alleviate negative feelings of shame and guilt. When you unburden yourself of the weight of your past, you free yourself up to move forward unimpeded. Often you will find that you are not so unique in your imperfection. The sixth step is we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of our character. This is one of the more difficult steps in AA because it's the culmination of everything that has come before. This is where they let go of the behaviors and attitudes that are holding them back. The reason that this step might be a little more challenging than the others is that those behaviors and attitudes are often being let go, have been the only way that they've ever known how to cope, right? So sometimes it means relearning a whole new way to interact with the world. So that's why it's important to have an additional form of treatment. So like individual therapy, not that 12 steps won't go over different coping skills, but sometimes it's a lot harder than it sounds. So it's also important to highlight that this step is not about perfection. It's about getting better. Throughout the course of their recovery, they will find themselves repeating the sixth step several times because it's so challenging to instill a new behavior. The seventh step is humbly asked himself to remove our shortcomings. So this is similar to the third step, but it's a little more specific. Now that a moral inventory has been completed, we see ourselves as we truly are, both good and bad. The truth is many of our shortcomings are intertwined with our addictions. And because we are powerless over the addiction, we are often just as powerless to overcome our shortcomings on our own. This is where the key concept of step 7 of the 12 steps of AA, humility, comes in. When we are humble, we admit when our ways of doing things isn't working and when we need help to overcome specific problems in our lives. There are 3 reasons why humility is so important in this step. The first is that it allows us to recognize the severity of our defects. The second is that it allows us to recognize our own limits. And the third is that it allows us to comprehend the enormity of our higher power's ability to transform our lives. The 8th step is made a list of all of our persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. So the 4th step was about personal house cleaning, but the 8th step is about social house cleaning. It is about recognizing the wreckage that you have left in your wake while you were actively addicted. A lot of times we burn bridges when we're under the influence because our reasoning part of our brain is not acting appropriate. We're usually reacting from our emotional part of our brain. So in order to continue moving forward, you have to acknowledge the role you have played in hurting others. When you become willing to repair the damage you have done, you again reduce the destructive pain, anger, hurt, and resentment that addiction causes. It is the willingness to make amends that is important because, as you will see in the 9th step, it is not always possible to make repairs. So again, this piece is hard because sometimes you'll have people who will forgive you, no problem. They're just happy that you're getting help. Others, not so much. So it's really just being okay with, okay, I'm going to make amends. And if everyone doesn't accept that, that's okay. Even though I wish they would, at least I know that I'm trying. And hopefully there's a peace that comes with that. The 9th step is made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. So, like so many other interlocking steps, the 8th step of the 12 steps of AA was chiefly about contemplation, while this step is about action. Now that we know what we have done and who we have done it to, we have to take action to right our wrongs. This is difficult, but it's also a necessary step. Difficult because direct means face-to-face and in person. We have to face those that we have wronged, take responsibility for the harm we have caused, and try to make up for them in some tangible way. It's easy to avoid this and try to forget about it, but it's really important so it doesn't eat up at us. Making amends is more than just apologizing. It is necessary because it starts to clean up the messes we have left behind. Since recovery is all about moving forward, making amends for the wrongs we have done to let us balance our books so we owe nothing from our addictive past. It allows us to have a fresh start, so we don't want things from our past holding us back. A word about wherever possible. So if you might have noticed that it says wherever possible. So sometimes it might not be the right decision to make amends. Reconnecting personally with someone we have harmed in the past can reopen old wounds or cause difficulty in someone else's current life. So we have to think of their well-being. So an example would be a person you may have physically harmed might be traumatizing by your presence. So if someone was under the influence and they raped someone, going back to that person is probably not the best move because you don't want to re-traumatize them. In such instances, it may be better to write a letter acknowledging the past harm, expressing the willingness to make amends the person may deem necessary, and asking for forgiveness. This step requires that we, 1, apologize, 2, try to repair our wrongs, and 3, ask for forgiveness. It does not require that the other person grant us that forgiveness, like I said. So, we have no control over what people decide to do, but we do have control over what we decide to do. When we are sincere but direct amends for forgiveness are not possible, we should simply let go of the burden that we have been carrying around and resolve to do better in the future in our interactions with others. The 10th step, continue to take personal inventory, and when we wrong, promptly admitted it. So the 10th step is about continued growth and vigilance. In essence, it's about laying the foundation for our future. So really thinking ahead at this point. When we are continually honest with ourselves, it is much easier to recognize triggers, behaviors, and attitudes that could result in a relapse. Admitting when we are wrong allows us to continue moving forward in humility without the denial and self-deception that addiction brings out. In addition, it also prevents us from accumulating more emotional baggage that can slow us down during our recovery. So perhaps the best thing that an ongoing personal inventory does is keep us really on track. It keeps us from straying too far away from the path of recovery. Moving on to the 11th step, states, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. This is a spiritual step, but people who have reached this point have usually come to terms with the God language the 12 steps of AA contains.
It's 3 o'clock.
So in other words, they have already formed their own personal concept of a higher power, whether it's God or some other higher power. So for some, God is an acronym that stands for a good, orderly direction, the path that they want to take for their lives. And others, it stands for a group of drunks or druggies, the fellowship they receive from others in their AA and NA meeting. To be more specific, prayer means talking to our higher power, sharing our burdens, admitting our wrongs, asking for help, and expressing our gratitude. So there's kind of, like God and prayer is an umbrella term, and it can mean a whole bunch of things. Meditation, on the other hand, means listening to that same higher power, putting aside our own egos and desires in order to understand what we should be doing. So our 12th and final step in the 12 steps is having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. We tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. This step of the 12 steps of AA is at once self-serving and selfless. For yourself, there are a few things that you can do that to better serve your own sobriety than by working with others who are still struggling. Being of service to others have several benefits, and we've talked a little bit about these, but it reminds us of where we once were and where we no longer want to be. So a lot of times when we see someone who is not as far in recovery as we are, it reminds us of past times, and it's kind of a humbling experience. Like, wow, I'm so thankful that I'm not there anymore, and I want to continue. Even though sobriety recovery is hard, I never want to go back. It holds us accountable, so it gives us a sense of purpose. I have a role. Even if I wake up and I don't want to do it for myself today, I don't like myself today, I'm going to do it for that person. It keeps us from becoming complacent in our own recovery, so it's always keeping us on our toes. It's always inspiring us to learn new strategies to help others, and it enhances our fellowship with others. But on the other hand, it allows us to benefit others who are struggling. So sometimes a still suffering person will trust you above others because you understand what they're going through. So sometimes people are like, I don't want to go to therapist because they're just going to want one thing and they don't understand what it's like, or that's their belief, or it's different than going to a family member who doesn't suffer with addiction. These people who have suffered with addiction are in recovery themselves have an extra layer of empathy. They also feel like they have insights that may allow them to help when no one else can. And when these people share their stories, others may be inspired by successful ongoing recovery to the point that they're finally able to regain their own sobriety. So it is important to understand that addiction is incurable and lifelong. Recovery requires vigilance and work one day at a time for the rest of our lives. You'll find yourself repeating the 12 steps of AA over and over as a means of safeguarding one's sobriety. So it's, again, the 12 steps of AA are not a cure for addiction. They are guiding principles that allow one to restore sobriety, sanity, and serenity over their lives. So I will post an optional handout that states the 12 steps, since these weren't written in the PowerPoint, just so you could keep them on hand and revisit them if you feel like that's something you want to do. But again, this is alcoholism, so other 12 steps may have accommodations made. So I hope that you enjoyed this lecture. I hope that you got something out of it. Feel free to post any personal reactions or additional questions in the discussion board. And I will talk to you soon.